The rich are growing their wealth very rapidly, and it's acting like a black hole in society. It's sucking the wealth away. There are basically two leading voices in what we need to do. There's me and my lot saying tax the rich, but there's another voice which is much, much louder, which is the problem is immigrants. And if you are a billionaire, which one of those two do you want to win?
Welcome to the podcast, Gary.
Thanks for having me.
How would you change the world?
I think the way we need to change our world is to tax the richest people in society much, much more.
Why? Why would that make a huge difference?
I developed this idea when I was working as a trader, all right? So I started working as a trader 2008, straight out of LSE, which is obviously Lehman crisis. And my job was trading interest rates. So to simplify quite extremely, interest rates go up when the economy is strong or when inflation is overheating, and they come down when the economy is weak. So in 2008, Lehman crisis, all of the rates go to zero. And then suddenly we're betting on when will the economy recover. It's quite interesting, right? So in 2008, bringing rates to zero is like an emergency measure, right? Before 2008, they used to do things like cut rates from 5 3/4 to 5.5. Everywhere in the world suddenly slashes it to zero. And the economic theory tells you this should cause a massive economic recovery. And we obviously know now it didn't happen. But at the time, every single year, the economists, the traders, the markets said next year, rates will go up, which means next year the economy will recover. Every single year, literally every year, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, all the way till 2020. And it wasn't until COVID when they finally said, okay, rates will stay zero forever. And then, of course, rates immediately went to 5%. So the first thing to point out is something is wrong with our economists and their ability to understand the economy and what is happening and their ability to predict the economy. And I wanted to understand that. So as you've said, I went to the London School of Economics, I went to Oxford, so I've studied a lot of economics. The theory is when you slash rates to zero, people are supposed to start spending a lot of money, and they didn't. So I had this novel idea of just going out and asking people, why don't you spend more money? And if you've never done it, I strongly recommend you do it. You'll learn a lot about the way our economy works. I went and asked them, and what people said was, I don't spend more money because I don't have any more money. I'm spending everything I get. But I didn't just take that at face value, right? I tried to dig into a little bit. And what I saw, this is back in the early 2010s. I would have been in my mid-20s. What I saw was our parents' generation, property owners, most of them property owners. Even my parents, who are quite poor, they own their own property. And my generation, who most of them would never be able to afford to own property. So what you see in there is basically the loss of the wealth holdings of the middle class. And I'm talking the actual middle here. Ordinary families are losing their wealth. This was bouncing around my head 2011, when I've been a trader for a few years. Everyone had been wrong for a few years. Then I got called into a meeting by one of Citibank's top economists. And he went through the financial situation of a lot of the world's major governments. So Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Ireland, but also the UK, the US, Japan. And what he said was, basically, all of these governments are effectively bankrupt. They spend more than their income every year. They're going further and further into debt. They're being forced to sell their assets to basically keep the lights on. And I came out of that meeting. What really struck me was the similarity between the British working class, the Western working class, and Western governments, which in both cases what you have is a group of people that used to own wealth and they're losing their wealth. And going more into debt. Exactly. And what struck me about that, I'm not a great moralist, I was a trader and an economist, was that it's impossible. It's impossible for everyone to lose their home and the government to lose all of its assets and everyone to go into debt and the government to go into debt at the same time, unless all the assets have been destroyed. And even then, you can't be in debt to nobody, right? So I was kind of bouncing around. Where has all the wealth gone? This is why spending is weak in the economy, because families are losing their wealth. That's why. And then obviously, I didn't have to look far. I was sitting on Citibank trading floor in Canary Wharf, surrounded by multimillionaires. And that was the kind of penny drop moment for me when I realized what is happening here is basically, it's the disappearance of the middle class. The rich are growing their wealth very rapidly, and it's acting like a black hole in society. It's sucking the wealth away from the middle class, from the working class, from the government. And I saw immediately that wouldn't stop. I saw because... Just explain how that happens. Why does the wealth go to the top? The simplest way is, Rishi Sunak suddenly magically appeared in the Times richest people, top 100 richest people in the country. wealth of £700 million. I think what people often don't realise is the passive income that comes with that. So if Rishi Sunak's worth £700 million, what's his passive income? And when I say passive income, I mean that the income he gets just from his wealth, not from his work. You know, he's going to make around 5%, £35 million a year. Let's be conservative, £26 million a year, £500,000 a week. So imagine you're Rishi Sunak now, and you're making £500,000 passive income a week. How much are you going to spend?
Not a lot of it.
You'd spend, 50 grand a week, live like the Queen, basically. I couldn't spend 50 grand a week if I tried, right? So the problem is, once you have this group of society with very large passive income, unless you have a rapidly growing economy, they basically have nothing they can do with that income other than buy up the rest of the assets. It's as simple as that. It's basically compound interest. If you have the wealth of the rich growing at 5% in an economy that's growing at 1 or 2%, there's nothing they can do. They outgrow the economy and they squeeze everyone else out. And what ordinary people see is house prices going up, stock prices going up, my kids can't afford the house. And what that is the rich squeezing the middle class out. It's the kids of the rich outbidding your kids for things like houses. I think that the best example of this is COVID. At the very beginning of COVID, it should have been very, very clear to everyone that governments, Western governments, including the British government, were going to run enormous deficits. They were going to give out enormous amounts of money. Now, my history at that time and now was as a trader who makes a lot of money by understanding how inequality affects the economy. So when I knew that the government's going to give out £500 billion, £1 trillion, the only thing that I care about is who's going to end up with £1 trillion. That's the only thing I care about. And I think, honestly, the most amazing thing I've ever seen happen in my whole life was a situation where we knew years in advance that the government was going to give out £1 trillion, and not a single person in government, in the media, in academia, in opposition, said who is going to get £1 trillion richer. It was amazing. So I did.
Well, because everybody thought that money was going to ordinary people to pay their wages, which it did.
Exactly, and this is a very good point. This is a really, really good, and this is exactly, I remember sitting on the sofa with my girlfriend at the time, racking my brains, because this was the narrative. The narrative was, government's giving out loads of money, but it's going to ordinary people. But if you look at the ordinary people, they're not getting richer because, and this was the mystery, if the government's getting poorer, somebody has to get richer. This is the way money works. It has to balance. So if government's losing £1 trillion, someone has to get £1 trillion. The narrative is it's going to furloughed workers, but furloughed workers are not accumulating hundreds of thousands of pounds, which they would have to be doing. So I was scratching my head and I was like, it was kind of like a bit of a Sherlock Holmes mystery. Where is this money going? Where is this money going? And I just traced it back. I was like, okay, why are the furloughed workers not getting richer? Well, that's because this money is not just a gift, it's replacing the wages that they're not getting. Okay, so then who has the wages that these workers would normally have been getting? That should be the companies that normally employ them. So are those companies getting richer? Well, actually, they're not, because the companies that employed furloughed workers were shut down during COVID.
They didn't have revenue.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly correct. So it's not the companies, because yes, they no longer need to pay wages, but they have also, exactly as you say, lost their revenues. So then it's who has the revenues, which normally go to the companies that are shut down during COVID, and that is customers. And this is the correct answer. The people who got richer during COVID were customers. But this doesn't fully answer the question, right? Because most customers, this is £20,000 per adult, £1 trillion. Most people didn't get 20 grand richer. So which customers got richer? So if you I look at my parents, working class family, not very rich, their expenditure didn't really fall during COVID because their expenditure is like 95% mortgage, bills, food. And most ordinary poorer people, that's their expenditure, rent, mortgage, food, bills. So ordinary people didn't save money during COVID because the essential sector of the economy was not shut down. The sector of the economy that was shut down was the non-essential sector, which we could call the luxury sector or the discretionary sector. So the people who accumulated money during COVID were people who normally have very large amounts of luxury spending. It was almost a perfect proxy for how rich you were. It's as simple as, so if you follow it through, it becomes pretty obvious that what lockdown is economically is the banning of the spending of the rich, and that spending of the rich being replaced by essentially printed money from government. So the government prints a ton of money, gives it to service workers, they use it to pay their rent, their mortgage, bills, goes to the owners of the houses, owners of the mortgages, owners of the corporations, the rich, who are basically not allowed to spend it legally. It's like money laundering, essentially. £1 trillion washed from the government through the poor to the rich. And
But it kept people eating and living in their homes.
People see that and think I'm against lockdown or furlough, right? I wasn't against these things, right? Furlough, if you're going to have a lockdown, you have to have a furlough. You absolutely have to. But there should be, somebody has to ask the question. It shouldn't be just me sitting there on my sofa doing this, saying if you're going to print £1 trillion, the rich will get £1 trillion richer, you're going to massively increase inequality. Because think, once you do that analysis and you realise, which I think is non-controversial now for people who look into it, that wealth inequality increased massively during that period, then you should be asking yourself the question, if we are going to pause the economy for 2 years and in that period massively increase wealth inequality and then unpause the economy after 2 years, what do you think that will do to living standards? Nothing could have been more obvious. If you massively increase, if we just click our fingers now and suddenly half your viewers lose their homes and those homes go to the rich, what is going to happen is those viewers will be poor now and the rich will be richer now. It's not complicated. So for me, this is the reason I set up my YouTube channel, it's the reason I started writing. I was screaming, oh my God, we are going to see the biggest and fastest increase in inequality in the history of the country. And as soon as we unpause the economy, you are going to see a massive inflation crisis. You're going to see living standards collapse. You're going to see a huge boom in the stock markets, house prices, because the rich have all this money now. Nothing could have been more obvious.
So the question is then, how do you get that money back? Is that what you're saying? Because the political narrative has been, well, we've borrowed hundreds of billions of pounds to get us through the pandemic, and of course we need to pay it back. And we're paying it back through, being very, very tight on spending and taxation and all the rest of it. And I suppose your argument is about where that money should be got back.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you know the government's given out £1 trillion and the government's £1 trillion in debt, which I'm not denying, nobody's denying, you please at least have an understanding of who has £1 trillion now. There's this kind of blissful, almost beautiful stupidity in the economics media. How can you not ask that question? If you know I think there's this. Honestly, I honestly think a lot of economists, even economists in the media, they conceptualize this spent money by the government as if it's like burnt firewood. Money doesn't work that way. If the government gives £1 trillion out, the £1 trillion doesn't disappear. Somebody is £1 trillion richer. And people say that money's gone outside of the country. But if you look at the trade balances, there's no massive decrease in the trade balance. That money is largely held within the country. And also, every government in the world did it.
Right, but so the question is who you mean by the rich. Because obviously we can all say, well, the multi-billionaires, maybe they should pay a bit more tax somehow. And we can have that conversation about how you get to it and whether it's possible to get to it. But the trouble is a lot of the people you're talking about who did manage to accumulate savings during the pandemic are people who do not consider themselves super rich. So they are people on good salaries, maybe six-figure salaries, but they are still people who are, in their terms, spending what they earn and struggling in their terms.
Yeah, the problem is not everyone who accumulated money during COVID, because almost everyone accumulated money during COVID. There were obviously some people who fell through the gaps of these support schemes and lost a lot of money, but most people accumulated money during COVID. But this is £20,000 per adult, right? So I think this is a really interesting thing happened during COVID, which is the government gave £1 trillion out. Most people managed to accumulate like 2 or 3 or 4 grand, and they thought they were winning. At the same time, because the average per person is 20 grand, if the average person gets 4 grand, then the rich are getting like 100 grand or 200 grand. And this really interesting thing happened where it was like a kind of economic experiment. What happens if we give every average person 2 grand and every rich person 200 grand? And the answer is kind of obvious once you step back and think about it, which is that prices go up massively and ordinary people's living conditions collapse. Because money, this is the key thing to understand, right? Money is not a real resource. Money is a relative resource. Money is a competitive resource. So if you get a bit more money and somebody else gets a lot more money, you will end up with less real resources, unless there are more real resources now. This is why distribution matters.
So let's come back to your first statement that you want to tax the rich more. So how do you want to tax the rich more, and why would that solve the problem?
First thing to be clear is when I say tax the rich more, I'm not talking about people on high incomes. I'm talking about taxing wealth, which is about people who have enormous amounts of assets. We already have a tax system which is very good at taxing working people. Let's say you are just an extremely wealthy person, you're worth £1 billion. And the way that these people work is generally they don't manage their own money. They'll have what's called a family office, they'll have like an accountant and a team of guys who manage the money. And they've got all this big chunk of money and they're trying to buy things that are good value. They're trying to buy, and they'll buy anything. They'll buy stocks, they'll buy bonds, they'll buy land, they'll buy property. suddenly a house comes up and it's cheap. And you have all of these family offices with loads and loads of cash now, and they're looking for good deals. If the house is cheap, they'll buy it. They will buy the cheap houses. That's the thing. They'll buy the cheap houses. They will. So the houses can't be cheap. Otherwise, these guys will buy them. Same as stock prices.
But British property isn't being totally bought up by the super rich.
No,
I think it's being bought up by the wealthy. You know, the people who are paying top rates of tax.
But it's bought up by the wealthy, or they borrow money. But where do they borrow the money from? They borrow the money from the rich. This is, who is behind the mortgages? Your mortgage is not to nobody. Okay, your mortgage is to the bank, but the bank also borrowing money. Who's the bank borrowing money from? The rich. Ultimately, these guys...
And paying them interest.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a simple case, I've got £500,000. Yeah, maybe I don't go out and buy the house. My sister needs a house. I've got £500,000. Okay, I can buy it and rent it to my sister, or I can lend the money to my sister. It has the same effect on the property market. Listen, at the beginning of COVID, I went out and bought £1 million of gold because I knew if you give all of this money to the rich, asset prices will go up. And I thought the easiest way to make money on that was to buy gold. Okay, and the gold price has doubled since then. But house prices haven't really doubled. And the reason why house prices haven't gone up as quick as the gold price or the stock price is for exactly the reason you say, which is that very wealthy people, they can much more easily and much more quickly go and buy £1 million of gold. Like I literally open my laptop, £1 million of gold, done. Simple as that, right? I can't go out and buy £1 million of houses like that. It's much, much more difficult. So the reason that housing has gone up more slowly than the gold price or than stock prices is for the exact reason that you say, that rich people just find it more difficult practically to buy an enormously large number of houses. But they have the money, and if the house price doesn't go up, then their family offices that manage their money will say, okay, well, housing's cheap now relative to stocks, relative to gold. Okay, maybe we don't want to buy loads of houses, but why don't we put our money together? We can give our money to a corporation, we can start a company that buys houses on behalf of us. And if you look now in the US, you are seeing a massive increase in corporate landlording, which is corporations who they fund their money from the rich buying houses. And if house prices don't go up here quickly, you will see the same thing happen here. But even if the corporates don't buy, you still need to be able to pay as much as this billionaire, or you'll get outbid on your house. It's as simple as that. Listen, I worked in financial markets. You are competing with the rich for ownership.
But I mean, because what your critics might say is that because you couch a lot of your arguments in terms of housing, because it's a good issue which people understand.
Yeah.
Why can't I afford a house?
Yeah.
Why might I never be able to buy a house in my lifetime? Which is something that's just sort of happening sort of for the first time in our lifetimes. But the reason house prices have gone up is more complex than that, isn't it? It's also to do with the multiples of salaries that banks have decided to lend. It's also the increase in the renting sector of buy-to-lets. It's not just about the very rich buying them up.
Well, name me one major asset class which has not gone up as much as housing.
Which has not gone up as much as housing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
everything's gone. Land's gone. Stocks have gone. Gold price has gone. Luxury art, luxury cars, everything. Every asset has gone. This is. I've been looking at housing for a long time, and one thing that's really interesting about housing is every single person in every big city in the entire world thinks that house prices have gone up because of the bad planning strategies of their local mayor. People in London think that. Yeah. People in New York think that. People in San Francisco think that. People in Tokyo think that. People in Mumbai think that. People in Hong Kong think that. People in Sydney think that. Listen, every single asset in the entire world has gone through the roof. To view the increase in house prices, not in the context of every single asset in the entire world going up, is idiotic. I'm sorry, it is. If every single asset in the whole world goes up and houses go up as well, this is because of a broad rise in asset prices. That should be obviously true. And I know, obviously, most people, especially in this country, they don't have any significant asset holding except for housing. So they only see the houses. But this is everything. This is all assets.
So let's come back to the question of why tax is the answer.
Yeah.
Explain to me why you think tax is the answer and how you would do it.
You know what? I did a video a while ago, which I think illustrates this point really well, which was what would happen if we taxed the richest people in the country an enormous amount and burned the money. I think this is an interesting thought experiment.
Just reduce the amount of money and...
Yeah, so let's say you do it. Let's say you reverse what you did in COVID. So you tax the rich £1 trillion. You tax £1 trillion, which is enormous. If that's £1 trillion in the top 1% of society, you're talking about £2 million per person. enormous. That's how much money we've given them, by the way. If you tax the rich, enormous amount. I'm not suggesting we do this, but this is to illustrate how taxing the rich benefits living conditions for ordinary people, okay? They don't have that in cash. They don't have that in cash. They simply don't, right? What do? They have to sell their assets. They have to sell their assets and they give that money to the government, right? And what you will see is, suddenly government debt collapses, so we don't need to have this austerity, which apparently need to have. You would see suddenly, who are they selling their assets to? Well, somebody has to get those houses. So what you see suddenly is housing being purchased by working people. You see suddenly a massive level of affordability of housing.
So house prices would have to fall massively.
Yeah. And then you would see interest rates fall immediately because suddenly these guys would have to slash their spending. So what you would see is, I think...
There would be a terrible downside in Britain to house prices falling, wouldn't there? Because so many people have their wealth in their
I don't think this is the way you want to do it. But I mean, what you want to do is you want to reduce that house price to wage ratio. And once you have the house prices falling, then you could cut interest rates to keep house prices the same and bring the wages up.
But isn't the same issue there that you ultimately need house prices to come down in order for ordinary people to be able to afford those assets?
I think what you really want...
And if you do that, you have a massive problem for all the middle classes who put all their money into their house.
I think if you manage it sensibly, you can, rather than bringing house prices down, you can bring wages up. I think that is the key.
How?
I think if you tax the rich enormously, then there's two things you can do, right? When you give a ton of money out, you push all of the prices up, but you also change the distribution, right? If you take that money out, house prices start coming down, then you can bring the interest rates down, and you can, instead of... in the last 20 years, what you saw was, I think there were basically two things happening at the same time, which is inequality. When you increase inequality, because ordinary people buy goods and services, and the rich people buy houses, when you increase inequality, it creates a drive to push asset prices up, and goods and services, and crucially wages, down. But central banks, when they manage inflation, they only look at goods and services and wages. So what they do is they start to slash the interest rates, which pushes the asset prices up even more, basically. But when you have that high level of inequality, you need to have very expensive assets because rich people want to buy assets. So if you start to reduce the inequality, you can reduce that distance between wages and assets. And you can choose which one you want. If what you're seeing is really falling house prices and wages are not going up, then you can cut the interest rates and you can push price level up overall. You have to reverse it. I mean, but you're right in what you say. We've kind of cut ourselves into a corner here where we won't allow house prices to go down, but the central bank won't allow wages to go up. I think we need to have this discussion about how do we manage that relative problem between very low wages and very high house prices.
And if wages go up, then that feeds inflation and then interest rates have to go up.
If wages go
up, you end up in a vicious circle there as well.
I think we need to step back and say, listen, we live in a situation where my dad lived in house price 2 times income, and I live in house price 20 times income, and my kids will live in house price 40 times income. How do we change that?
Yeah.
And I think certain kinds of inflation, if inflation is led by wages and leads to increased living standards, it's not always bad.
So that's a tax change you wouldn't do, which is to tax the rich massively and then burn the money. What should we do?
So what I campaign for, and I'm a member of a couple of groups, Patriotic Millionaires, that campaign for the same thing, I campaign for a 1% wealth tax on wealth of above £10 million. So if you were worth £12 million, you'd pay 1% on £2 million, which is £20,000 a year. I want to make it clear, these guys make 5% a year. So it's pretty modest. That's what we campaign for. And that would free up a lot of money, which could be used to reduce taxes on working people. It could be used to support failing government services. I think that is a start. But I think if I'm being totally honest, that would not be enough to stop the rich from eating the middle class over time.
Exactly, that's what I was going to ask you. That's not taking enough money away to take the pressure on asset prices away.
No, it's not. But we're not going to win that thing. What we're campaigning for is less than we need, and we're not going to win it. We need more. We need more. If you don't stop the wealth of the wealthiest from spiraling upwards very quickly, it will inevitably lead to the disappearance of middle class wealth and also the disappearance of government wealth. That is what will happen. Really, we need to tax these people much, much, much more. I think we need to be looking at inheritance tax on very large estates. I think, sometimes when I say things like that, people turn around and say, oh, but they don't have the money in cash. They'll have to sell the assets. If all of the assets are owned by the rich, and the rich never sell their assets, then working people will never get assets. It's not rocket science. You need the rich to sell that. How else do you get your assets back? And I know people will say, oh, you don't live in a zero-sum economy, build more, build more, build more. Every government for 25 years has tried that. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. If you have to keep an eye on that distribution.
Now, the other argument against that, obviously, is that the rich people will leave.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are saying that's happening already. So what would you do to make sure that that money doesn't just go to Switzerland or somewhere else?
Okay, so I think this argument relies on a couple of misconceptions, basically. Number one is, I continually say, when I say tax the rich, it's not about working people. Okay, if I was to say, let's raise taxes aggressively on working people like yourself, very high-skilled British workers, you could probably leave and you could probably do this show from Dubai or you could do this show from Singapore. You probably could. But if what you are is somebody who owns £1 billion of British assets and you move to Dubai or you move to Singapore, well, you still own British assets. British assets is British mortgages, British housing, British businesses, businesses that sell to British consumers, British land, British natural resources, British buildings, right? You own these British assets. You move to Singapore, and when the British government comes and says, well, you own £1 billion of British assets, you owe X amount, £50 million income from those assets, you've got to be taxed on it. You say, I live in Singapore. Where's your money coming from? It's coming from British taxpayers, the British people who live in those homes that you own the mortgages to. Your money is coming from Britain. If you owned let me ask you a question, right? If you owned £1 billion of Chinese assets, and then at the end of the year, the Chinese government said to you and said, Krishnan, where's your taxes on the money you made from your Chinese assets? And you said, sorry, I live in Britain. Do you think the Chinese government would accept that?
I don't know what the Chinese system is, to be perfectly honest. But
they're sensible enough to not allow the people who own their country to not pay tax because they live abroad. And I think we need to look at a system which essentially makes tax voluntary for rich people. This is not working people.
But why would anybody ever put their money in Britain again? If that's the system
because
you
what I
brought
want
in?
is for Britain to be...
Because we are not China. We don't have a massive manufacturing base. There's not, why bother?
If you reinforce that working class, then you will have wealthy consumers who can spend money. And people will want to sell to those British consumers. What I want is for Britain to be... I think people sometimes, they like to call me a communist. They like to think, oh, Gary, why do you want to grow the state? I'm not trying to grow the state. What I'm trying to grow is the wealth holdings of ordinary British families. I want to go back to a time when ordinary British families own their own home, and own a big chunk of the stock market. And then you'll have a situation where British families and British workers will have a bit of money in their pocket and they can spend money. And then people will want to invest in Britain because this is where the consumers are. This is where the activity is. We're killing the consumer. And if you protect the consumer, then people want to invest in Britain because this is where the money will be.
The other criticism coming from the other direction that you will often hear is, well, what you've missed out on is immigration and the massive increase in population. Isn't that really to blame? Yeah,
this immigration thing. So I've got a YouTube channel, which you'll know. It's called Gary's Economics. It's an economics YouTube channel. And I never thought I would have to be talking about immigration. I'll be totally honest with you. I'm not an expert on immigration, right? That's not something that you learn about. You study economics at university. I've never considered it to be like a massive driving factor behind the UK economy. But I started to see about 2 years ago, it coming in really aggressively, no, it's not the rich. The problem's not the rich. The problem is immigrants. The problem is immigrants. And at first it was a bit, and then it was a bit more, and then it was a bit more. And I was kind of thinking, where is this coming from? But I realized we're getting to a situation, I think we are in a situation now, where the number one thing which is preventing higher taxes on the rich is basically anti-immigrant sentiment. And that worried me, because I realized immediately, I'm almost wary of saying this, if the rich find out that the number one thing preventing them from paying higher taxes is dislike of immigrants, they will start absolutely funding the shit out of it. And I was thinking, oh my God. And I feel okay saying this now. I didn't want to say it before because I didn't want rich people to be like, let's fund anti-immigrant sentiment. Let's fund anti-immigrant sentiment. The reason I feel okay saying it now is because we've got Elon Musk. You've got Elon Musk coming in, richest man in the world, aggressively supporting and funding anti-immigrant sentiment. And it makes total sense because if you're smart, you know that this economic situation gets worse. And it will. I guarantee you, it will get worse and worse and worse, significantly worse for ordinary people. And then we will have to have some sort of significant political change. And I think there are basically two leading voices in what we need to do. There's me and my lot saying tax the rich, but there's another voice which is much, much louder, which is the problem is immigrants. And if you are a billionaire, which one of those two do you want to win? So I'm not surprised at all to see Elon Musk coming in and really aggressively funding the problem is immigrants, the problem is immigrants, the problem is immigrants. But I think...
Well, but to what extent is the problem immigrants?
Well, I think if you want to understand that, the most interesting thing to look at is what the Conservatives did. So the Conservatives obviously became the party of Brexit. They did a hard Brexit, which means the UK takes over complete control of its borders. We have to accept, before Brexit, there was a degree to which the UK government didn't control immigration because you have to accept potentially unlimited immigration from the EU. After Brexit, you could control that. So did the Conservatives reduce immigration? No, they didn't. They increased immigration, despite the fact
because
that...
they realised they needed immigrants to do certain jobs.
I think that they came in and they sat down and they had a look at the immigration and they were like, well, a lot of these immigrants, most of these immigrants are working in the NHS, working in the care sector or students, and we haven't, you know, we kind of need those things at the moment. And you know what? I think people sometimes think that I'm like super pro-immigration. I'm not. I'm not. But what I see is, I see very, very wealthy people using this argument as an excuse to absolutely impoverish the working class.
Because what we've started seeing in that discussion is the whole question of GDP per capita. And the fact that that is now going down slightly as population increases. Now, that obviously plays into our whole obsession with growth. And whether a growing economy will ever trickle down to ordinary people. So how dangerous is that narrative, or how meaningful is that narrative, first of all, around GDP per capita?
You know, I think we have to accept that large levels of immigration may have affected, especially some groups of society, negatively. And some, you know, I come from a poor background, and I went to London School of Economics, very fancy university. I went to Oxford. I work in the city. I work in media now. Like, I published a book. These are all like very, you know, upper middle class spaces. If you allow to migrate, for example, a lot of manual workers, this affects the middle class, who, you know, professor at university. If a load of plumbers and builders come in, and you're a university professor and you want a kitchen renovation, that affects you differently to somebody who is a plumber or a builder. And I think there's sometimes a frustrating lack of class awareness on this. I think we have to accept it. It will have affected some groups differently than others, and it might have affected some groups negatively. I think we have to accept that. But I don't think it's the main cause. You know, I don't think it's the main cause. The group of society which is getting massively richer is the rich. It is the super rich. These guys are getting really, really, really aggressively richer. And I think they are kind of cynically using this. I think they know. And for me, my plan is to unite the working class, to push back on this group of society that is taking their houses. And if people can be convinced to hate migrants, and in the extreme case, to hate people of colour, that makes my job impossible. Because the British working class is extremely multiracial, multi-ethnic. So I really, really worry about this narrative growing and growing.
This then takes us to the whole question of why our politics doesn't deliver anything like what you're suggesting, and why ordinary working people who, as you say, are facing falling living standards, don't vote for higher taxes on rich people.
So there's kind of two questions there, right? Which is, why do governments and politicians not do it? And why do many ordinary people not support it? So I think the governments and the politicians, it's actually quite a complicated question. The first thing is, the way that economics is taught nowadays, extremely, extremely mathematical. People learning very, very complicated models with no inequality in them. Those are the models that you learn at university now. So anyone who's got high up in the game in economics has basically spent 20 years studying models with no inequality. This is it's kind of like before Copernicus, when we thought that the sun moved around the earth, right? These guys are not willing to accept it. But the second thing you have, really, is when you talk about our discussion about what to do with the economy, there's different groups of people in there, right? There's economists, there's politicians, there's people in the media, there's academics, there's the people that fund all of those people. Every single one of those people who is in that conversation at a high level is rich. Every single one of those people. And if this crisis is what I think it is, which is a crisis of inequality, that benefits the top 5%, it definitely benefits the top 1%. So you've got a room full of people, most of whom are in the top 1%, discussing what we need to do with the economy, and they get richer year after year after year after year. Every single stock market in the entire world is at an all-time high. Who owns the stock market? Them. These guys are benefiting from it. These guys are benefiting from it. And
so you think people are just being hoodwinked? I mean, you know, in your own example of Elon Musk versus you know, immigration, you know, in this election, the majority of American voters chose to go with the super rich argument.
Yeah, well, what I see is increasingly, and I'll be honest, this upsets me a lot, right? Coming from a working class background, I see a bifurcated society where increasingly ordinary people from poorer backgrounds and the kind of rich people who inhabit these elite jobs, they never meet each other. They never, ever, ever meet each other. And what you get is a kind of stunning level of ignorance about what's happening in the real world. You know, there was an article in the Financial Times about a month or 2 months ago by an intelligent financial journalist called John Byrne Murdoch. He's a good guy, he's a smart guy. And he was saying inequality hasn't increased. And he's like, I've looked through the numbers. And he included in that line, in that article, the story for the poorest 20% is unambiguously good. That's what he said. Where does he live? The poorest 20% can't feed their kids, Krishnan. You know, everybody watching this knows that. The poorest 20%, they can't turn the heating on, they can't feed their kids. And this guy thinks life's getting better for them. I think what you have is...
Well, although there have been targeted government interventions over decades now that do look at the poorest in terms of the benefit system and stop people starving.
Well, we're getting less and less of them. We're getting less and less. But, you know, I used to write for The Guardian and I used to write for broadsheets. And I stopped doing that. And I started doing YouTube because I am convinced these elite spaces, broadsheet newspapers, political spaces, high-level academia, they are absolutely full of people that they don't even realize it's happening. They don't even realize that poverty is happening. They cannot see it. They're separated from it.
But this is difficult because what you are saying is ordinary working class people are ignorant.
No, I'm saying the exact. Oh, well.
You know, that they are having the
what I'm saying is the elites that
by elite media
they're
and
being lied
politicians.
to. No, I think, well, I mean, if you look at the growth of my YouTube channel, I don't think they are ignorant. But listen, I'll be honest with you. I'll be totally honest with you. I think the quality...
Well, they're not voting for higher taxes, are they?
Well, I think if, you know, give me a couple of years and they will. The problem, listen, ordinary people on the street, right? You know, they're ordinary guys working ordinary jobs. You can't expect them to be economists, okay? It's our job, you know, your job, my job, the rest of the people in the media to educate them. And I'll be totally honest with you. I think we've done a poor job of it. An absolutely poor job of it.
And that's why you're doing your YouTube channel.
Exactly. Yes. And that's why my YouTube channel, we got 1.2 million views yesterday, one day. Listen, there's a reason why I used to get paid £2 million a year to do this. Because I'm damn good at this, okay? I shouldn't be on YouTube. I shouldn't be here. It doesn't make no sense. I should be working for a hedge fund making £5 million a year, okay? I'm here talking to you, talking to your audience, because I can see the exact same reason that I can make millions of pounds a year doing this is because I see that ordinary people are going to be driven into poverty. And listen, I don't expect ordinary people to understand what's happening because it's our job to educate them, and the media has done such a bad job of it, and that is why I'm going to make my YouTube channel bigger than the media.
But given so much of your economics was about understanding ordinary people's lives, it doesn't sound like you've yet quite understood why people vote the way they do.
No, people vote the way they do for loads of different reasons. I mean, the first thing to say is there is no party in this country that is campaigning for taxing the rich. There is none. So people can't vote against, you know, people can't vote. Well, we do. The Greens supported it. The Greens came in the last election.
And lots of people treat the Greens or Jeremy Corbyn or anyone else who wants to raise tax on the rich as, you know, crazy, right out there and unrealistic.
Well, I think people have been told by the economics media that this is a recession, that this is 2 bad years, this is 5 bad years. But I think people are seeing through that. People are starting to realise that this gets worse and worse and worse and worse. I think people desperately want something new. People want this. You know, and I would encourage you and other people in the media to get real with the public about what's happening with the economy. I think people, you can pull the wool over the eyes of the public for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, but you can't do it forever. You can't do it forever.
So you think there will be a reckoning? Do you think it will be a democratic, normal, peaceful one, or do you think there'll be something else?
I'll be honest, I think, look, people know the ship is sinking. People know the ship is sinking and people want something new. There's only one thing on the table now which is believably new, which is Nigel Farage. But a lot of people in this country don't want to vote for Nigel Farage. They're worried about where Nigel Farage might take this country. I'm worried about that as well. But they don't see anything else that is new. And I think Labour's economic plans are pretty rubbish, pretty uninspiring. But there's nothing on the table. So, you know.
So what do you say to the working class person who says, well, I want to vote for reform because I want change? What is wrong with the reform economic programme?
Are they going to cut taxes on rich people? They're going to cut tax on rich people.
So they'll make the problem worse.
Which is going to lead to rich people having much, much more money. And at the end of the day, your kids are competing with their kids for things like ownership of homes. You know, I'm sure there are people...
They are the fastest growing political party.
Oh, yeah. Listen, I understand why. Because the Conservatives failed and because Labour will fail and people want something new and reform seems new. I understand why. And, you know, I hope when they get in, which I think, you know, unless I manage to do something about it, I think they probably will, I hope that they do something on inequality. By the end of the day, Farage is a very wealthy person. I don't think he's going to raise tax on the rich. I think he's going to cut tax on the rich. I think that's their official policy. I've made millions of pounds by understanding if you give a load of money to rich people, that makes ordinary people poorer.
So in your world, sort of, who would be free of a tax rise? You know, how much could you earn or aspire to earn? Because remember, a lot of the reason people are wary of political promises to raise taxes is because even if they don't earn it now, they think, well, I do want that. And I don't want to work really, really hard and then find it all taken away. So how much in your world should you be able to earn without expecting vastly higher taxes?
We're campaigning to raise taxes on wealth of above £10 million. Wealth of above £10 million. So it's not even about how much you earn. No. I think I want to reduce taxes on working people. I want to reduce taxes on working people, especially people who are on lower incomes. I think you need to reduce tax on them. Let me
just pick up a couple of things, because obviously you're high profile now, and so every time you say things, it then generates a backlash. You were recently on Piers Morgan's show.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
And you used a sort of a narrative that you've used before, which is your parents' generation were able to buy houses and to own their own house. They lived in an era of high taxation. We now live in an era of lower taxation, and nobody can. And people have pointed out that actually there was no capital gains tax in those days, and that the tax burden on people was actually low. The overall tax burden was lower than it is now. I mean, was that a sort of a narrative that was wrong?
You know, I'm going to go and look into it, definitely. I'm going to email my guys and say, what were the rich actually paying? But the big question is, you know, who owned the houses? How big were the mortgages? What was government wealth? You know, the wealth has gone somewhere. Yeah. Inequality is, if inequality is not higher now, who owns the wealth? Because the middle class don't own it anymore. There's a great graph by Thomas Piketty, the French economist, looking at government wealth. And, you know, in the 70s and 80s, government owned assets. Now the government wealth is massively negative. Well, where's that wealth gone?
And do you think you can withstand people having a go at you? I mean, you know, as you become higher profile, there will be more. You know, there was a Financial Times piece about you a few months ago.
5,000 words, would you believe?
That was about, well, he wasn't as good as he says. Yeah. He wasn't the highest, you know, the best trader in the world. We spoke to his people. So there's going to be a lot more of that. And I could ask you about that, but in a way it doesn't really matter, because the point is you did make millions. So whether you were the best or not is kind of irrelevant to this conversation. But you're gonna become a target. You already are.
Yeah,
are you prepared to withstand that?
I don't want to. I don't like it. You know, I quit banking in 2014, right? And I didn't write this book until 2024. And the reason for that big gap in time is because I didn't want to do this in a way that was the Gary Stevenson show. I didn't want it to be me on the tin. If you read my book, you know, you'll see I had like serious problems with my mental health. I was not in a situation, and to be honest, I don't want to be the guy who's out there being attacked by the Financial Times, and I don't like getting recognised in Lidl when I'm trying to buy chicken stock. It stresses me out, right? And
you do shop in Lidl, do you?
Yeah, I've always shopped in Lidl since I come back. I live near a Lidl, right? It's cheap, and it stresses me out, and I don't like it, and I don't like and when I look at the growth of the channel and I look at how much space there is politically, because it looks like it's going to grow and grow and grow, and my profile is going to grow and grow and grow. And it freaks me out, Krishnan, and I don't like it. And I'll admit I'm scared and I'm worried about it, but what else can I do?
And if a political, because in order for your campaign to work, politicians need to pick it up. Yeah. So if politicians were to come to you and say, okay, come on, let's turn this into a political program.
Yeah.
You've got a high profile, you can come out and be the face of it.
Yeah.
Do you want to go into politics?
First of all, I think I'm already in politics. I don't want to be an MP. I don't want to be Prime Minister. Those look like pretty difficult jobs. I'd much rather be doing what I'm doing. But I want to influence policy. 100%.
You wouldn't want to be the Chancellor?
Listen, if it came to a situation...
Because you spend a lot of time saying they get it wrong.
If I felt that I could have an impact there, I would have no choice but to do it, right? If I felt it was an option, I thought I could have an impact. But the truth is, I was talking about this to my guys the other day. Like, if I was Chancellor now, there'd be very, very little I could do. Honestly, because if I come out and try and tax the richest, I will get attacked. But all of the richest and most powerful people in this country, in the world, will attack me. Then the newspapers will attack me, everyone will attack me, and it will become extremely difficult. And unless the general public, your average British man or woman on the street, understands we need to deal with inequality to protect our living standards, to protect our homes, to protect our children, it will be impossible.
So the demand needs to be bottom up.
Listen, the reason I speak to the public rather than these politicians, because this is not achievable without the support of the public. This is not achievable without the support of the public, without the broad support of the public. But The power that I have, the power that we have, is if those guys win, the public will be driven to poverty. And what I'm offering is a genuine escape from poverty. Listen, I don't need to do this, Chris, right? It's February, it's cold outside. I could be in the Philippines, all right? I don't need to do this. I don't need this hassle. I don't need to be attacked by the Financial Times.
So why are you doing it?
I do this because I come from a poor background and I see people that look just like me, just like my friends, just like my family, just like the people I grew up with, and I know what the future holds for them, right? I've been at the top, right? I've seen what's happening. I've seen the tsunami coming, and it's my town down there. It's people like me that are going to get washed out. Listen, this gets worse. This gets worse. And I don't know if I can stop it, but I have to at least give it a go. What am I going to do? I'm going to have, I would like to have kids one day, and I'm going to tell them, I made my money betting on the collapse of society. That's the truth, right? And they're going to turn around to me and say, did you try and do anything?
You still do make money betting on the collapse of society.
I do.
I mean, doesn't that trouble you?
No, because I'm not the one making it collapse. Listen, the only reason anyone listens to me is because I was one of the best traders in the whole world and I made millions of pounds doing it.
But is there a moral problem with making money out of your betting that poor people are going to get poorer?
That is the power that I have to stop it. If something terrible is happening, in my opinion, your moral responsibility is to try and stop it. And I do everything I can to try and stop it. I get up every day. I was making these YouTube videos in my mate's back garden for no money for years and years and years and years. Listen, Chris, you see me, and your viewers can see me, they can hear me. Kids like me don't get paid millions of pounds for no reason, okay? The only reason anyone listens to me is because I'm a damn good trader, okay? And I don't just say this, I don't just come on here and give my opinions, okay? I'm betting on everything I've told you today. Everything I've told you today, I'm betting because I believe it.
I know, and I'm asking you, is there a moral problem with doing that?
No, because that is my superpower. That is how I will protect your listeners. That is the only reason I'm here. That's the only reason you're listening to me. That's the only reason I can go on Piers Morgan.
In order to have your credibility, you need to still make the money.
Of course. Listen. These guys who tell you economics media on the news, okay, they get paid whatever, 50 grand a year, 100 grand a year. I got paid millions of pounds a year to do it because I'm the best at this. And I still beat them every year. I am the best at this. Okay. People attack me. I am very, 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 very good at this. I was at one point the best on bank. Oh my God, this stuff. I'm very, very good at this, okay? And listen, the best economists in the world are all traders. And when people ask me, who do you listen to? You say the economics media is rubbish. Who do you listen to? I listen to the exact same thing every trader listens to. I speak to the other traders. I trade the market. I watch the market. All of the best economists in the world are doing this. If you are saying you want to run the economy without talking to traders, that's saying like you want to win the Premier League without any professional footballers. The best paid 1,000, 10,000 economists in the world, they are all traders. And there's only one of them who's stupid enough to give the information away for free on YouTube, and that is me, Krishnan.
So just crystallize it then for us, because people might listen to this, and you sometimes listen to podcasts like this and you kind of go, I've listened to a lot and I can't really remember what the central message is. What is your central message to working class and middle class voters right now?
The reason you are getting poorer is because of the rapid growth in wealth inequality. Your wealth is being sucked away from you by a super rich class. And unless you fix the tax system, which taxes you more than them, you and your kids and your grandkids will get poorer and poorer.
And what should they do about it?
They should fight for a fairer tax system, higher tax on the rich, higher tax on wealth, less tax on work. They should support my stuff. They should watch my videos on YouTube. They should educate themselves. They should educate their friends and their families. Listen, the politicians are not going to do it. The fire brigade is not coming. Ordinary working people need to defend their political position, their financial position by working together.
Gary Stevenson, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.